All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the April Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee meeting. I'm Lance Crawford, I'm the vice chair. I'm filling in for David Nash, the chair, who's out today. So we're going to start off with a roll call. No, David Nash is not here. David Bartholomew? Here. And I'll encourage everybody to speak into the microphone. Here. Jamie Benshoff?
Here.
Sarah Copley? Elvia Diaz?
Here.
Rick Freeman?
Here.
Claire Hubbard? Tricia Killian? Marcus Laws? Dustin Mailman? Tim McLeay?
Here.
Celeste Ordaway? And Joelle Steininger? And Jennifer Teague.
Here.
So I think we need one more for quorum. So at this point in time, we can't vote on anything, but we can discuss. So I'll skip over the item on the minutes from March since we can't vote to approve those. So we'll move on to our adopted community values. So one thing that we want to do moving forward is discuss one community value in each of our meetings. So our first one is be bold. The COC will remain faithful to the aggressive goals, strategies, and actions it commits to, even when there are tough decisions to be made. The COC will not settle for half measures that disregard the needs of its most vulnerable citizens. So I'll open it up for a couple minutes for discussion. Is there anything you've seen over the past month related to this community value, or anything you'd like to see to enhance this moving forward?
I could
Yes.
add something. I don't know if I think this is a very touchy subject. What entails being bold may not mean the same thing to others as it means to me. At points, I feel like when our forefathers sat down to write the Constitution, whether or not they included everybody or whether they included some or others or who they included, whether they included their pets or insects or things that we can't see, is whether that's relevant, I'm not sure. But as we sit down and write our own charter, whether there's a charter that existed that they were drawing their ideas from or not, I tend to think in terms of having nothing in front of me as I do this work. And so, in terms of being bold, that is how I'm approaching this work, as if there's nothing there. So, if anyone has an idea to add, that is how I'm drawing information. So I'm approaching this from an aspect of what Asheville needs, not necessarily how we're looking at Houston, Florida, Germany, France, England, what lies in the abyss. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Yeah, Jamie.
Being bold, I know we'll get into the work group reports in a little bit, but I wanted to say I'm on the shelter work group. We've been touring shelters, and I want to be bold after the Ramada Inn fiasco. We let down a lot of homeless people who were in what should be called interim housing, and the program lost. So we don't have low barrier housing. And I think the shelter work group needs to make bold moves to address past hurts as well as going forward.
Very good. Thank you. Anyone else?
Jamie, hearing that, do you think we should add additional language about past history in this language, or are you comfortable with what's there?
I'm comfortable, thank you.
I will say to that there is another community value about leaving the past behind and moving forward. That might be some good discussion when you all get to that.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, next up, I'll pass it over to Emily for Homeless Strategy Division updates.
Thank Thank you, and good morning. We have just two updates from our staff team here to share with you all this morning. The first, and hopefully you've already seen all of this, the first is that we have a learning opportunity coming up on Housing First. You know, Housing First has been around for many years now. There is a strong evidence base around it, and also there is a lot of confusion around it and a lot of consternation around it. And so we asked Josh Johnson from the National Alliance to End Homelessness to put together some information sessions for our community so that we can have some conversation about that, really get clear. I think we have a lot of confusion across the community about what Housing First is and isn't. So our goal in these sessions is to really get clear about what that model actually is, have some opportunity to talk about examples and case studies and ask questions and give us, what I'm also hoping for in this is that we get some common language that we can all be using, again, just to really ground in a collective understanding about what Housing First is. So he is going to be doing 2 virtual sessions that are open to anyone in the community to participate in. We asked, both sessions will have the same basic content, but we asked that he sort of tailor one to service providers, so practitioners, folks who are currently working on homelessness, and then a second session for the general public. Again, anyone is welcome to register for either, so if the scheduling doesn't line up or you'd prefer to go to the other one, that's perfectly fine. But wanted to make sure that both of those are available. We'll also be recording those so that we can have them, and we want to be building kind of a library of training resources, and so we'll have those available going forward. Registration for both of those is available through our division website here at the city. Happy to send that information to anyone if they can't locate it, but it's in the news and events section on the city's website, on the Homeless Strategy Division page on the city's website. Questions? You want to add anything? Debbie is our liaison on this. Okay. Okay.
So I just wanted to confirm the Coalition of Asheville's Neighborhoods Executive Committee voted to propagate this information to our email lists. I'm on the hook for that, and so I'll get that distributed. And a few of city staff are copied on some of our email lists, so you'll see it come out.
Great.
And it'll go on our website, probably on the homepage.
Great. Thank you. All right, secondly, following up on the conversation from last month's HIAC meeting about compensating folks with lived experience for their board participation. So again, March HIAC discussion about possible recommendation to the city and county on compensating folks who are otherwise unpaid for their time as subject matter experts. Catherine on our team has been looking at examples from other communities about how they structure that, and we included the materials from one of those in the meeting materials. They have some really thorough documents, policy and application, and a lot of good information. It seems like the decision points for structuring a compensation plan are looking at eligibility. So it seems like the recommendation is that folks ought to have lived experience in the past 3 years is the recommendation, so current or recent, but putting some time frame around it. That there be an application process so that compensation can be elective, as Jamie mentioned, maybe last meeting or the month before. Not all folks would want to pursue that opportunity, so making sure that it's elective and people can apply. It's not just default. There are decisions to be made around a payment structure, whether that's a standing stipend. You know, we had some conversation. David Nash mentioned that that if stipends are $200 or below monthly, then they're not factored into rent calculations for folks in subsidized housing. So that's a consideration that might be a win for some people. Payment method, whether that is a check or a gift card, there are some communities that that give people the choice. Some communities do one or the other. Looking at record keeping needs, you know, are there timesheets involved? What kind of documentation might be desired? And then, of course, looking at a budget, which would be directly related to the structure that's developed. The Alliance recommendation in their Within Reach report, they referenced a number from another community that was $24,000 a year. So that's just a frame of reference point that we have. So what I am hoping for is that we could have maybe a meeting of, that might be optimistic, I'm always optimistic, but maybe one meeting of a handful of folks from the board or the community who would be interested in talking through those decision points and then bringing a proposal back to the board for consideration. Not asking for a work group, we have a lot of work groups, but just a kind of a informal meeting to have that conversation.
Cool, we'll open it up for discussion if anyone has any thoughts.
I just have a question. In the research you did, where this is effectively done elsewhere, is there anything about documenting expectations? You know, what the role really is, and, I don't know, attendance expectations or any of that kind of stuff, so there's not confusion?
Yes, I think, and Catherine, you may need to jump in on this, but I believe in the those sample documents that I included in the meeting materials, they have a policy that I think does have a role description, and I also am curious if the governance work group will end up with role descriptions for all board members. I would think that kind of, the description for folks with lived experience or the expectations would get baked into that governance charter alongside expectations for any board member.
At least what I've studied, which has primarily been Houston, because I've been absent, has a fairly clear set of role responsibilities and expectations that would not only be used in this process, but would be used in the interview and evaluation process to get people who want to do the work that the COC needs. So I think Jennifer would say we're a far bit away from delivering that part yet.
Sure. I just want to get a little bit of clarity around the group when they meet in regards to the funding pieces of this. And so would the request end up going to city and county? And is that something that the work group or the small group that's meeting would also discuss? Like for funding this, and would it be a split? Is that something they would discuss, I guess?
So, part of what prompted this was Councilwoman Roney asking whether the board had a formal recommendation to the city and the county. So I think that's something for you all to discuss. How I would envision this is that small group would be thinking through the detail work about what's the plan, like how would it work, and then assuming that the board wanted to, and then separately the board would decide about moving forward a funding request. I think you all could do that today. I think you could do that based on a framework with that meeting. You might not want to do that. You might want to look at other funding sources. I think all those are options.
All right, so any input on providing a formal recommendation to the city and county to allocate $24,000 a year?
I think we could schedule a meeting.
Okay.
I think that's best, personally.
Are you volunteering to be in that meeting?
Absolutely.
Any other thoughts? All right.
Sorry, do we need to identify additional members to be a part of that meeting now, or is that, how will that be decided? Are we just going to volunteer?
Do you think that Kim Rooney, I know she's not here, would want to be part of that meeting, or should we potentially ask her?
Yeah, and I can also follow. I know we don't have our full group here today. Good morning. No, you're fine. I can also follow up with an email to the board and ask if there are folks who'd want to participate in that.
Okay.
We might also ask, I think we have some homeless coalition people in the room. We might also ask if there are other folks who would want to participate.
Okay. So I've heard we want to have a meeting before we have a formal recommendation to the city and county. Does anyone disagree with that? If you're interested in volunteering for that, you can speak with Emily or myself or David. Since we do have a quorum now, we'll go back to the minutes from March. Do I have a motion to approve the March minutes?
Motion to approve March minutes.
Second?
I'll second.
All right. We will vote on that. I say yes. David Bartholomew?
Yes.
Jamie Benshoff?
Yes.
Elvia Diaz?
Yes.
Rick Freeman?
Yes.
Tricia Killian?
Yes.
Tim McElroy?
Yes.
Joelle Steininger?
Yes.
And Jennifer Teague?
Yes.
Okay. March minutes have been approved. Did you have anything else, Emily? Okay. All right, next up is Matt Cable for Buncombe County Public Input Opportunity.
Good morning. Thank you, Emily, for inviting us to share some information on an upcoming public input opportunity the county is hosting. Just for a little bit of context, I've met several of you over the last couple of months, but you've probably seen some additional faces at your work group meetings and here at HIAC from the county. The Community Development Division is going to be the division that houses the new homelessness program manager position that's being created as a result of the Within Reach study. And until that time, we are acting to support those activities until the position arrives within our division. I will note that that position is posted now, so anyone who is listening who might have interest or wants to share within their network, we are actively recruiting that position currently. So I was here at your last meeting, and you all had referenced use of county properties or city properties, local government properties for homelessness efforts, shelter discussions about how underutilized properties might be better used for those kinds of purposes. And currently, the county is undergoing a process where we're looking at underutilized county-owned properties for purposes of affordable housing, which is part of that continuum. You know, a lack of affordable housing is a significant barrier and part of the issues of homelessness in our community. We are currently in the midst of a public input series of meetings. We had one last night here in downtown Asheville at 200 College Street. We're having a second input meeting tonight. That's going to be off of Lester Highway at 339 Lester Highway in the Land of Sky offices. And these meetings are to discuss and to gain public input about what the interests are in use of 3 separately identified sites for affordable housing as the principal use, but also what else we might need to consider as we look at developing those properties as affordable housing. So we're trying to promote as much as we can and get out in the community information about these sessions. I encourage people to attend and share their input. There is a virtual session also being hosted on Saturday that you can attend if you're not able to make the meeting this evening. There's an online survey. So we are doing a lot of things. And I do have flyers, which I'll give to Emily to distribute here, and also if any members or individuals who are here at the meeting would like to get that information. You can visit publicinput.com/affordable housing development. I encourage anyone who's interested in this project to subscribe there so you can follow those activities. But you can also participate just in an online survey if you're unable to attend any of those meetings. The properties I will mention, they are along Cox Avenue, on Valley Street, and in the Irwin Hills community. So happy to answer any questions that you might have.
How many units are you looking at?
So what has been conducted thus far in the evaluation of which properties to consider, so there were a number of other properties that were reviewed, is what we think we could minimally obtain on the site. There is always a parking element that's required for a lot of funding. So we looked at if you had the lowest cost parking options, what would be the minimum kind of deliverable. And so between the 3 sites, it's over 400 units, estimated about 430 units. That number could be higher, depending on the parking structures that are utilized. If there aren't any other questions,
Matt, I'm sorry, can you remind us when the position posting closes?
it closes later next week. So it's been open for the last several days. We're doing an initial kind of 2-week window. we may extend depending on, the candidates that we receive, so.
Thank you.
Matt, what locations were being considered again?
So the specific addresses or the properties are 50 and 52 Cox. So there are some existing structures on those sites. 46 and 30 Valley Street. So it's the current location of the planning department and permits and inspections. It's kind of that large corner lot. And then a site along Irwin Hills. It's beside the education, the teacher housing out in the Irwin community. So it's directly adjacent to that site.
Thank
Can
you.
This is my confusion. What's the difference between affordable housing and income-based housing?
So affordable housing, you can define it a lot of ways. But when we talk about affordable housing at the county, it is for housing made available to individuals earning less than 80% of area median income. But it should also be based on your income. So you should not be spending more than 30% of your income for it to be affordable to you as an individual. So when we talk about a project being an affordable housing project, it has to serve incomes at less than 80% AMI, but your rent should be income-based.
How does this affect people on Social Security or other fixed incomes?
Sure. So you find a lot of individuals on fixed income are at those income levels. And so, again, providing additional units, which is the ultimate goal of this activity, is to produce more units, will make more opportunities available for individuals who are earning less than 80% of the area median income, which oftentimes individuals on Social Security or with, fixed income like that are in that.
Sort of like a trickle-down theory where if we get more people at higher incomes housed, that'll open up the income-based or voucher housing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I don't want to get too far down that path, but there's a lot of issues around the fact that we have a limited housing supply, which is driving up overall market values, which then puts more constraint on what were traditionally affordable units to purchase or rent. So it's driving up the rent costs. Any of these units would have, capped amounts of rent charging based, again, on those median income thresholds. So it's creating a space of protected units available to those earning less than 80% AMI.
So this is 80/20. So is that what you're saying? There-
80/20?
Well,
Sorry.
out of the 430 units, are all of these income-based?
So all of them would be available to households earning less than 80% AMI. It could be, and we would expect that some of those units would be available to those earning less than 30% of AMI. So there are going to be different levels of affordability, but at minimum, it would be less than 80%.
Can you, not to put you on the spot, but do you know that 80% AMI number off the top of your head?
So it is variable based on your household size. So I don't like to throw that number out because it also changes every April, and we're waiting for that update of what that is. What the county has done, and I believe the city may have something similar, but we have on our website, buncombecounty.org/affordable housing, you can go in and select your family size, and it will show you what the different AMI thresholds are, and you can kind of determine for yourself if within your family you're within an eligible AMI level for traditionally affordable housing units.
Could you repeat that website again?
It's buncombecounty.org/affordable housing.
Great, thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the funding portion of the meeting. So the fiscal year 2022 Continuum of Care Awards was announced. During that year, our COC was eligible for 95% of funds to renew existing grants as well as a new project for survivors of domestic violence and a new housing project. So the finance work group got together, reviewed applications, and made these recommendations: full renewal, funding for helpmates rapid rehousing project serving survivors of domestic violence, a 5% decrease in renewal amounts for all other projects, which include Homeward Bound's permanent supportive housing projects and the City of Asheville's HMIS project, a new project from Homeward Bound for rapid rehousing for the general population. So we brought that to HIAC, and HIAC approved that in September, totaling $1,977,474, and city staff submitted the application on behalf of the COC. So it was announced on March 28th that Asheville and Buncombe was awarded $1,911,754. All renewal projects were awarded as submitted, with the exception of Helpmates project, which received $26,004 in additional funding. The new rapid rehousing project at Homeward Bound was not awarded. So next steps, HUD will contact the grantees directly, and as a COC, as our performance improves, our COC will become more competitive and more likely to have new projects awarded. So once awarded, the new funding becomes part of the annual renewal amount, increasing the total available funding in our COC each year. Any questions?
Can I just
Yeah, absolutely.
chime in? So the middle two bullets there under next steps, I think are really important for this board in particular. So as the continuum of care overall, as the system performance improves, we will become more competitive. These dollars are competitive across the country. So we will become more competitive. The application that we submit is scored against other COC applications. I think there are 400 and some COCs in the country, and so what we want is to be doing a better and better job all the time, because that is how we end homelessness. And also, as we do a better job, then that increases our score. We become more competitive. The scoring, the new rapid rehousing project at Homeward Bound that was not awarded was a bonus project. So very big picture, we're generally eligible to renew all of the existing funding that we have. The only way we get new funding is if we are competitive, and so we score high enough to get a bonus project awarded, and that's what Homeward Bound had submitted for in that rapid rehousing project. So our COC overall was not competitive enough to get that bonus project awarded. When we get a bonus project, then that becomes a renewal in the following year, and so this is how over time we have this kind of snowball effect to increase the total pot that's available in continuum of care funding. So Charles is going to talk about our system performance measures in a bit, and certainly it's the purview of this board, to be really steering the ship so that that performance continues to increase over time. But it really directly relates to the resources that are available in our community.
Thank you, Emily. Anything else? All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I
Yeah.
add one more thing?
Yeah, go for it.
Yesterday, later in the day, we received some feedback from HUD on our application, so we don't get a full analysis of exactly how we scored in every component. But in a formula I don't understand, they sort of pull out different pieces and tell us what our score was out of the maximum available, and they give us some comps to other communities. So I just got that yesterday. I will include that in next month's discussion so that it can be really clear what our opportunities are to improve.
Great, thank you.
I have a question or a request. Could the governance team get that information for next month's meeting, so that as we're looking at governance, make sure we have the right processes in place to work on those places?
Absolutely.
Great. All right, next I'm going to invite Sarah Dickerson from ELIDA to the podium to talk about Foster Youth to Independence Tenant Protection Voucher.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me today. My name's Sarah Dickerson. I am the program director for the ESTA program at ELIDA Homes. I'm here to talk about the application for Foster Youth to Independence Tenant Protection Vouchers, which is a collaborative effort by many organizations here in Buncombe County. So included in this MOU, you can see the Housing Authority is the lead on this. And then our Public Child Welfare Agency, or DSS, is a huge part of this. But included in our third-party partners, one of the partners that we have is the Continuum of Care. So we are presenting this to HIAC to get HIAC's approval for including the Continuum of Care on this MOU. Other agencies include ALIDA, Goodwill, Mountain Housing Opportunities, and the Appalachian Mountain Community Health Centers. So with this MOU, all of the people and third parties are providing supportive services. The idea of this is that these are initial application for 10 vouchers that would be new vouchers coming into our community that would be provided by HUD that are for youth who have aged out of the foster care system or are aging out in the next 90 days and are facing homelessness. So our goal is to house those youth early and keep them out of the homeless system. These vouchers are a little bit different. They're tenant protection vouchers instead of tenant-based vouchers, so they are time limited. They're 3 years of assistance for those youth. With this MOU, the areas that the HIAC might want to be considering, so with statement of cooperation, we do have that this is a 1-year signed MOU with automatic renewal unless there's a 30-day notice of any amendments needed. We're looking to align with the COC goals of ending homelessness. And then we have liaisons here, and what I will take a half second to say is I do believe we will need to identify a liaison who will be the liaison for the COC to be listed in this section of the MOU. Moving on, we have youth eligibility being 18 or older, currently homeless or at risk of being homeless and has left the foster care system or will leave in the next 90 days. It does not allow for HUD double dipping, so you cannot be in the 18 to 21 program at the same time as receiving these vouchers, but it can be someone who's aging out of the 18 to 21 program to receive the vouchers to continue their services and have another bridge after that program. Supportive services are being offered between Goodwill, ALIDA Homes, and AMCHC, addressing employment, education, and mental and physical health. What we're looking for with the COC is that we integrate these vouchers and slating into the coordinated entry process. We want to include stopgaps so that we are not having bias in the allocation of these vouchers. So we want to have these youth identified and included on the by name list and the slating process to be aligned with the coordinated entry process. I can get into more detail, but that's really the bulk of what everyone needs to know, and I am happy to open up for questions if anyone has any for me.
So just to be clear, the ask or the proposal is that the board votes whether or not to sign on to the MOU as the continuum of care. I think you'd be voting to designate me as the person to sign for us, for you. And the expectation of the COC in participating in this project is all related to coordinated entry, so related to identifying folks who are appropriate referrals into the voucher opportunity.
I just want to say a couple additional comments about that. One, I do believe this is still draft form. I just want to make sure to state that while the county has looked at it, the final sayers need to review it. And we felt like from the county's perspective in relationship to the Public Child Welfare Agency portion of this, that it was really important to work through the COC system. So HUD actually does not require that in relationship with these vouchers, if that's my understanding. But both in alignment with what the Alliance has suggested and also in knowing that our staff doesn't really know necessarily the prioritization of being able to align people into the voucher system, we felt like it was really important to work through that COC system. And so you see a lot of language added to this MOU about working within the system that we're trying to build in the coordinated entry system here. And that was very intentional with a lot of conversation about utilizing the system that we have to prioritize the most vulnerable and the most appropriate to access what vouchers we do have available.
So my question is this. So how many vouchers, number one, but also in the transition, what you're saying is that the period of time for this transition is 1 year, and 1 year because prior to that transition, there are no goals. Because
So-
we're waiting for something to happen, a spark or whatever happen to set these goals.
Yeah, so at this time, we are applying for 10 vouchers. Each community is allowed to apply for up to 25. We felt it was important to not take too big of a bite and not have the supportive services in place and the people in place to do these effectively. So for year one, we're applying for 10. With annual renewals, you can always increase up to that 25. And in fact, there's actually ability to go past that 25 if you meet certain criteria with utilization. This MOU is set as a one-year MOU with automatic renewal, but the ability to amend, because yes, at this time, we don't have the vouchers. The application process with HUD is that we submit the completed MOU, a list of people who have been identified as eligible, and submit all of that to HUD for them to review to see, yes, we have the system in place, we know how we're gonna do this, and there are people that we can serve with it. So at this point, we are in transition. We're creating this MOU with the hopes of getting these vouchers, but they are not yet guaranteed. HUD could come back and say, there's only 7 available, so you only get 7. But the vouchers themselves are for 3 years. So there's an annual recertification process, just like with all vouchers, looking at that income piece and all of those aspects, but the vouchers are intended for 3-year use.
Do you have a working model already?
So these,
Well,
yeah, we have in the community, with the American Rescue Plan, we got emergency housing vouchers, which were incorporated into the COC coordinated entry system. So we have in this community done a similar process with a similar type of intervention.
understood. I mean, I kind of already knew that, but, all right.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Elvia, I would just add, in relationship to how we plan to identify individuals, from the perspective of the foster care, a quick aside is the foster care 18 to 21 program actually now here in Buncombe County actually resides within adult and aging services. We've recently moved it out of child services. I'm sorry. So sorry, the pollen is just... So we've recently moved it out of child services. So it now actually lives within adult and aging services. And back to the comment a minute ago about really wanting to work within the coordinated entry system, what we've decided to do is to identify anyone who is eligible. So anybody who is either going to be aging out, anyone who has either terminated from the program or who has decided not to take the foster care 18 to 21 program, they will all be sent to Goodwill, to our links coordinator, and then they'll be assessed and go through that process. And then if they're interested, be sent to ELIDA. And so we felt like that was the most appropriate way to identify anyone who may be eligible, give them that opportunity, and then assess them for the vouchers.
I am beaming because I've done some of this amazing work in Maryland, so I'm just like really happy for this.
So you touched on just a minute ago that you requested 10 vouchers instead of going the whole way, you know, so we can make sure we had the supportive services in place. And I think you touched on it a little bit, Jennifer, on some of those. But could you expand on that a little bit about what kind of supportive services that, you know, we're looking at for these individuals?
Yeah, absolutely. So supportive services include housing, navigation, and sustaining services case management, which ELIDA Homes is committed to do. We also have connection with Goodwill services, so the services related to GED access, college education, financial assistance for college education, work clothing, all of those great Goodwill services are integrated and available for all of the youth. Access to behavioral health and physical health services through AMCHC is integrated, as well as, I feel like I'm forgetting one here, the recertification process and mediation with landlords is something that ELIDA Homes is committed to provide. So there's outlines in the MOU in the section that says supportive services that uses HUD's language on what those supportive services required look like. And it has agencies listed next to it, but then in third-party agency responsibilities, it has additional commitments and how that looks within our community. So HUD might say you need to have assistance with GEDs and accessing college education courses. And then third-party responsibilities under Goodwill, you'll see the exact programs that they have to be able to do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do want to mention, I know Jennifer's mentioned that she's been working on this with Sarah for the county. David Nash has been working on this for Public Housing Authority and myself for Goodwill. And David Nash and I both plan to sign off on this for our respective organizations. So I do want to vote on this today if we would like the HIAC to sign off on this. So do I have a motion to approve that?
I'll
Motion to
motion. Then you can use mine as the second then.
Okay. Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you. I'll say yes. David Bartholomew,
Yes.
Jamie Benshoff,
Yes.
Elvia Diaz,
Yes.
Rick Freeman,
Yes.
Tricia Killian,
Yes.
Tim McLeay,
Yes.
Joelle Steininger,
Yes.
Jennifer Teague.
I'm going to recuse myself only because the county still has to review final draft for approval.
Okay. So Emily, if we have 7 out of 8 who voted yes,
If I might provide some clarity, unless a member is voted to be able to recuse themselves, then a recusal would count as a yes. So you would need
Okay.
to vote to recuse in order to have a 7 of 8, otherwise it would count as unanimous vote.
okay.
And if you feel like you need to recuse, there would just need to be a motion, a second, and a vote on the recusal.
Okay, so as it stands now, it would be unanimous? Okay. Great. Thank you, Sarah. All right, next up is the funding allocation work group. So the Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG funding cycle, opens up in July. They're due in October for the following calendar year. These activities include homelessness prevention, street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, HMIS. So we as a committee review the applications, make the recommendations, and we create a scorecard to make those decisions. So in 2023, our COC was awarded with a little over $128,000 ESG funding, which is used by Helpmate and Homeward Bound. So what I'm proposing today is the staff are requesting a work group of 3 to 5 members led by HIAC and with participation from the Homeless Coalition leadership or their designated representatives to prepare for the upcoming ESG funding cycle, including developing that scorecard that we use to make those decisions. So Sarah Copley has agreed to lead this effort, but I want to open it up for discussion to get any input on moving forward with this work group, but also whether we would like to separate it between ESG funds and COC. So any input on that? Because the options are we could move forward with a work group that does both, including creating those scorecards, or we could separate it. Any input?
I just have a thought, which
Okay.
isn't really, it's kind of off topic. Usually the grant requests are with people who know how to do that. Is there going to be any outreach to maybe lesser-known services in order to assist with grant writing?
Emily, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. I think that's a really wonderful question. What we have traditionally done is post the opportunity on the city's website, send it out to the Homeless Coalition and to the HIAC distribution list, which includes not only you all, but folks who sign up. I think we have about 230 people on that distribution list right now, to just try to make the community aware of the funding opportunity. And that's all we have done historically. So I think there is plenty of room for this work group or the board overall to suggest additional ways that we can get that information out to folks in the community. And I think staff can work with you all as the board on kind of some technical assistance opportunities. You know, how can we as staff help create some info sessions or some opportunities for folks who may not be as familiar with this funding, because it's complicated money. It's not simple money to use, and it's an important resource. And so, can we provide some technical assistance so people feel really comfortable with that and equipped to submit an application if they want to? So, excellent question.
Any other thoughts?
So in my job, I actually manage some very similar federal funds for older Americans funding. And we do, that's a great suggestion, Jamie. We do very similar. We hold an info session. We walk step by step through the application process and then support a new providers in applying. So any opportunities that there are to host those kind of sessions and walk through potentially even new providers. Thanks for lifting that.
Emily, do you want to speak to the pros and cons of having ESG or COC separate or combined in this work group?
Sure, I can do that, and then you all, so last year, Lance, Jamie, David, and David Nash were our finance work group, and so they did a really heavy lift, so you all might speak to that also. They reviewed ESG and COC and Code Purple requests, and I think there are pros and cons to both configurations, so pro, I would say, is that we're gonna walk through the same basic process for both pots of money, which is we as staff facilitate what we just talked about, getting the word out, receiving those applications, putting those materials together for you all as the work group to review them, and then convening those meetings and that kind of thing. And then you all review, you hear from the agencies who've applied so that you have an opportunity to ask them questions and they can present what their vision is for the funding. And then you all make a recommendation to the board. It'll be that same process, whether it is two separate groups, whether it's combined. Excuse me. So I would say a pro of combining it is you just, get familiar with how that works and what you need to be looking for and the kinds of questions you want to be asking. The funding is fairly different, and the scale of funding is very different. So you saw we got $1.9 million in COC funding this year. We have $128,000 in ESG funding, so very different pots of money. The eligibility is very different. The kind of how extensive the application is and the materials are is pretty different. So I guess I would say process is the same for both, and content is different for each. And I think a consideration really is workload distribution. Do you all want to? Do you want to identify folks on the board who want to really build that expertise and do that kind of heavier lift on reviewing applications and making recommendations? Or do you want to kind of distribute the amount of work that it takes to get through both of those processes?
Okay. Any other input? Could we start with the group to address the ESG funds and then maybe address, because that would come later, right?
Absolutely. So ESG is traditionally in July, opens in July, due around October, and the ESG office, this is funding that comes through the state Health and Human Services Department. They just sent out an email this week about a meeting for COCs later in April to get clear timelines, and so we don't have that information yet, but I expect that it will come in July, be due in October. COC, in my experience, seems to be really variable, but last year I think opened in August and was due in October. I would expect that it would come a little later than ESG.
Okay. I propose that we start with a group to focus on ESG and then address COC once we get those more details. Does that work? Do I have a motion to approve forming this work group for ESG?
Motion.
Okay. Have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
I just have a question.
Okay.
I just have a question about how this interrelates with governance. And will we stipulate that in the charter? Is that stipulated in others' charters?
I think that's an excellent question, and yes, I mean, I think what you might want to get to is a standing structure. In some communities, that's a rank and review committee. Some communities do it separate for ESG and COC, some combine it, so yes.
Okay. So if we approve this, we could have the governance work group add that to the charter.
I would think that what you might do is initiate this ESG work group. Again, you have some time to figure out COC, and that's happening on a parallel track to the governance work group,
Okay.
which might end up then directing what the COC process looks like. And in any scenario, I would think that for next calendar year, what the governance work group puts in place is what would be followed.
Okay. Great.
I
I imagine we're gonna have a number of these situations in this transition
Right.
year, you know? but-
Yeah, okay. We have a motion and a second to form this work group. I'll say yes. David Bartholomew,
Yes.
Jamie Benshoff,
Yes.
Elvia Diaz,
Yes.
Rick Freeman,
Yes.
Tricia Killian,
Yes.
Tim McElroy,
Yes.
Joelle Steininger,
Yes.
and Jennifer Teague.
Yes.
Great. That is approved.
Can I ask, part B of this item, can we
Oh, yeah.
talk about folks who might be interested in participating?
Thank you for bringing that up. Any volunteers to be a part of the ESG work group? Sarah will lead the effort here, but. Thanks, David. Anyone else? There's still time. You can.
There's still time, and I also, I guess, let me ask this question to the board. I think, you know, ultimately, you all will have to vote to approve the application that gets submitted. That's the requirement. There is not a regulatory requirement around who participates in reviewing applications that then come to the board with recommendations. So, would you want to open that up to other folks in the community? We've had a lot of Homeless Coalition participation in our other work groups. And my suggestion here is that we have 3 to 5 people on this particular work group. So currently we have 2 board members. Would you want to, suggest that those other 3 seats be filled through some other process?
I think that's a good idea, especially if there's no other volunteers from HIAC currently.
I think that there's a couple other work groups that haven't been formed yet, so there's a time schedule here to where I have no idea where or what to fit in. So there's, I think, 2 other meetings that I have to attend that I don't know when they are, to even plan a third, so.
Yeah, and I'll also just acknowledge, like, you in particular are on 2 work groups right now. That's a lot of work. And so I think part of my hope in this, in including folks outside of the board, is not to spread you guys too thin. You know,
Which
you're
is
really
why
holding a lot.
sorry, our little
ahead, yeah.
conversation, which is why I stated, before we add people, we need to know where we need to add people, and this might be a good place to say, now it's time to vote somebody in.
Could I ask for clarity on that? So we've had opening on HIAC that we haven't been filling at the council level because we were waiting on recommendations and transition and updates. Are you suggesting that we need new HIAC members to help carry capacity?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's, I think, traditional to have a bunch of people. It looks like you're busy and you're doing something when you add people, and then there's a bunch of people, well, great, you have a bunch of people standing around doing nothing in government, right? And so when we actually have something to do that we can't get done, it's nice to have somebody who is qualified to do that work. And so even I have people who I've like, hang on, I think I have something for you to do here that I haven't even mentioned, that are qualified and ready to do this work. But until we have something specific for them to do, I'd rather not say, because I want them to work.
We've also moved to quarterly appointments, so the Boards and Commissions Committee will be able to meet like monthly print deadlines for, say, Urban News or La Noticia, to do more effective outreach and not set short deadlines where we're chasing our own tail and putting everyone else on the hamster wheel. But what that means is there's a HIAC opening, and we don't have a meeting next month, so there's 2 months for folks to apply for that opening. If there was a recommendation from this group not to keep the freeze, but to go ahead and fill an opening, I would be grateful to carry that forward to boards and commissions. I also hear some wisdom around bringing in community members to test out what that looks like, because that is a recommendation that we can, broaden our outreach. My curiosity around that is, what if we put someone on finance and then they end up with a conflict of interest because they are one of the applicants?
Yeah, I think anyone, excellent point, anyone who participates in this work group, whether they're a current board member or otherwise, would need to know in advance that they would not be pursuing that funding opportunity. That's a definite conflict that we need to steer very clear of.
Is there still a confidentiality requirement?
In term, like when you review the applications, yes, yeah.
So I'd like to think that we're getting some good community engagement, and the chairpersons of the various work groups are learning about the skills of the people who are attending and doing hard work in these work groups. And that might be a better short-term source of people than the traditional process. And, you know, governance is going to be working very hard on role descriptions and that sort of thing. So I think we should tap those who are either in the work groups or wanted to be part of the work groups as candidates, you know, refer those names to the chairperson, and then let the chairperson decide whether we go back to the way we used to do things. That would be my recommendation.
So we have two, I'll just say a thing and you guys edit any of this, but we have, if we had 5 work group members, we currently have 2 identified. I could send an email out to everyone who's currently participating on those other work groups to invite interest, and then pass that information on to Sarah. She would select the other 3 people. If we didn't have 3 other people, what would you suggest then? Would it be, I love to give Melanie work, Melanie's in the back corner here. Would it be asking the Homeless Coalition to do a similar process to identify folks who might be interested, and then still having Sarah make that final determination?
Yeah, I'd be in favor of Sarah making the determination on whether to, you know, lift the freeze on the traditional process. I think, from what I can see, we've attracted some interesting folks who are motivated to do this, who might not have been motivated to apply through the boards and commissions process, and I'd just like to see if they would fulfill the objectives of this team.
I want to get some clarity that we're talking about, because I got a little confused when we started talking about boards and commission and open seat on this board versus the 3 seats that are potentially available with the funding allocation. So the boards and commission seat, would we need to make a vote or open that for discussion today?
Well, I mean, you could make that formal recommendation. I think that would strengthen the recommendation because we have had it frozen for months. If we had a new member of HIAC, it might expand your capacity to fill these work groups, but I also hear like making sure they're ready to fulfill the objectives because you're in like this transition period. So a recommendation around that could look like we recommend to the Boards and Commissions Committee and the City Council to fill the opening on HIAC, considering the transition and making sure that we have someone with professional and lived experience to meet the objectives of the work, or something like that. Otherwise, we're gonna probably keep holding that opening, and then you might have less capacity. Maybe that's the goal right now because you want to work on bringing more community members in, and I respect that too. But a formal recommendation would be helpful.
So I think that's something we really should discuss. I think I can already see there are good reasons to get somebody to increase the capacity, like you said, but also since we are in transition, I think it should be an agenda item. And certainly with David not here, I think we should talk about whether now is the time to add people or whether we should wait. So, and as for the current item about the work group, I think we should try to get Sarah to take applications. We should try to post it. We should all share this information. I think it's a really, good way to bring people onto the business side of what we do. You really get to see how the funding, first of all, the great partners and the great applications, but also how there's just not enough money. And working with Jamie on it last year, I think it was really helpful to me, and she got really involved in it. Now it's on the HIAC, so I think we already are, bringing talent to the continuum of care. And so I think we'll try to look to add those, and Sarah can head that up, and I'll work with her and Emily to get a group going before I guess they'll come out May?
July.
Okay, so we have some time.
My hope in asking for this now is that we are really ready to go by July and that the scorecard can be published along with the application so that agencies know what you're looking for and, know how to put together a strong application.
Emily, can we add the discussion about the HIAC seat to the May meeting? Okay. For the sake of time, we need to move to Charles. All right, Charles Young for System Performance Measures.
Good morning. I am charged this morning to walk you through the system performance measures. I won't be going through all the numbers. That's in your meeting materials. So Emily and I worked on pulling out a few of the highlights in terms of what to review in this meeting. The system performance measures are basically 6 measures on how well our homeless services work as coordinated system. And these are established by HUD. They were initially required by an amendment to the McKinney-Vento Act in 2009 by Congress. The McKinney-Vento Act was originally passed in 1987 to start allowing federal money to be addressing homeless programs. These measures do play into our application to HUD and does affect what funding decisions that play into HUD's review process. The data covers a 12-month period and is for the HUD year from October 1st to September 30th. So what are the 6 measures that HUD is asking us to look at? The first is a decrease in the length of time persons remain homeless, a decrease in returns to homelessness after permanent housing placement, a decrease in the number of persons experiencing homeless, an increase in employment and income growth for homeless persons, a decrease in first-time homelessness, and an increase to obtain and or maintain housing. So before I go into some of these numbers, there's a couple of disclaimers. First of all, these numbers only reflect HMIS participating agencies. You can see there's a list of them on the right in terms of what agencies fed into this data. So you have ABCCM and their program, Transformation Village, Veterans Restoration Quarters, Rapid Rehousing, and Street Outreach. You have Caring for Children, their Trinity Place Shelter, which has since closed, so they are currently not an HMIS participating agency. You have Elida Homes, First at Blue Ridge, Haywood Street Respite, Homeward Bound, and their programs of street outreach, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, with several funding sources, home diversion, and targeted prevention. Then you have Salvation Army and Sunrise Community. Another disclaimer about when you're looking at this data is we do know we have data quality issues. One of the metrics we have a disclaimer on because we do know that there is an issue with the data that we'll be working on to get that addressed, and we've notated that in our presentation today. I would also say if you were like me and you're looking at these numbers and you're saying, why did a metric go down from last year or why did a metric go up from last year? Unfortunately, our software is limited in giving us the ability to have that kind of view of the data. I can say that the entity that we belong to called North Carolina HMIS, which is a group of COCs that coordinate technical resources around HMIS, has recently voted to bring online a new resource, what's called a data warehouse, if you're familiar with that terminology. But what it should do is give us more access to our data than what our current software vendor is willing to do. So that will help tremendously in us being able to mine our data more effectively. Also, the data quality issues in terms of, we don't make that statement lightly. Emily and I obviously are very concerned about that. I'm working very extensively, meeting with agencies reviewing their data entry protocols, identifying any gaps or opportunities for trainings, and figuring out how to address those, so that we are trying to move forward on improving our data quality. So the first measure is the length, yes?
I have a question, sorry, I didn't catch it before you changed slides. Under Homeward Bound, does street outreach mean AHO?
Street outreach is based out of AHOPE, yes. So the measure 1 is length of time persons remain homeless. And what this metric is doing is looking at the number of bed nights that people have in emergency shelters or transitional housing. The total number of people served was 792 for the report period. And if you look at the section where it says emergency shelter plus transitional housing, last year we reported an average length of time homeless of 224 days. This year, an average of 218 days. So our average length of time for that those service projects was reduced by 6 days. On measure 2, returns to homelessness from housing, measures the extent to which people who exit homelessness into permanent housing later return to homelessness. And I won't go into each individual subcategory there. You can see we have unsheltered, emergency sheltered, transition housing, and permanent housing, but collectively, the return rate from 2021 was calculated at 15%, for 2022, 17%. So we had a return to homelessness that increased slightly by 2%. Measure 3, number of homeless persons. This is not based on our HMIS software. This is based on our PIT count, at least this first part, 3.1. There's 2 parts to this measure. And if you look at the totals, in 2021, the PIT count that was reported was 527. The PIT count for 2022 was 636. So we had a net increase of 109 people who are homeless.
So I had a question there. Can you go back one?
Sure.
So we have on there like the PIT count data. Do we have HMIS data on the same categories that we're looking at on this slide right now?
Yeah, there is to a point. There is, yes. So we don't necessarily, outside of PIT, are going to track unsheltered in HMIS. So that piece would not be there. But
Right.
Emergency shelter and transition housing is the second part of this measure. And this is based on HMIS data. And interestingly enough, in 2021, we reported 993 individuals in our count. In 2022, 815. So the number of sheltered homeless persons decreased by 178 between the 2 years.
So would you say then that the HMIS data is more, and I know you said we had some data integrity, issues at this point, but would you say that that's a more accurate depiction than the PIT count?
You go ahead, sure.
I would say neither of them are as accurate as we want.
Oh, well, sure, yes.
And that we, as you know, we certainly are aiming to make HMIS very accurate so that the point in time data really becomes not as meaningful to us because we know in real time all the time what our population is.
Correct.
So I've been here about, 6 months, and so I'm learning, what the lay of the land is like. I would say that the advantage to our HMIS data is you have actual daily staff to client interaction, and that data reflects that. Whereas PIT is just that one night for the most part, and we may be capturing people, we may not. So I do think probably these numbers are a little better than what your PIT count is.
I
from
felt
my
the same way, but I wanted other opinions, so thank you.
Yes.
Is the discrepancy possible because of COVID housing? I think it was at Red Roof Inn between 21 and 22.
Yes, I think, I think that's exactly right. That change in 178, I'm sure has a number of small changes, but the majority is, I think, is related to both the Red Roof Inn and Ramada, which were at varying points in time included in all this.
So where would those folks fall in this data? Would they fall in under transitional housing or emergency shelter? Just for clarity.
Emergency shelter, and I'm sorry, I'm wrong. The Red Roof Inn had closed prior to this reporting period, so only folks at the Ramada. Right.
Yeah.
Only folks at the Ramada would be included, but they would be included as emergency shelter.
Thanks.
Measure 4 is in employment and income growth. We're looking at changes in earned or non-employment income, but only for participants in COC-funded programs. Right now, we only have one funded program that this measure relates to, which is Homeward Bound Permanent Supportive Housing. You can see in 2021, they had reported 54 participants whose income increased. 2022, that went down to 45 out of 110. So employment and income growth change decreased by about 17%. First-time homelessness measures the number of people entering the system with no prior enrollments in HMIS in the past 2 years. People with no HMIS entries in the prior 24 months in 2021 were 684, 2022, 618. So the first-time homelessness decreased by 10%. And the last measure, obtain and or maintain housing, measures the number of people exiting homelessness into permanent housing and the number of people in permanent housing projects who retain housing. And this is where we have a notation. You can see for unsheltered, our success rate in 2021 was 53%. It went down in 2022 to 25%. And that's a huge drop, and that is due to basically, in a nutshell, missing data. And so I'm working with the agencies to make sure we don't repeat that and keep our data quality, keep a focus on our data quality so we can get a more accurate idea of what is happening with unsheltered. However, if you look at emergency shelter, transitional housing, and rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing, they are showing a net increase of 9% for sheltered or housed clients to obtain or retain housing. So, in summary, what does our report card look like at a very high level? The length of time persons remain homeless moved in the right direction, 6 fewer days. Returns to homelessness after permanent housing placement went up 2%. That's not the right direction. Reduction in number of persons experiencing homelessness went up 109, so that's not a good direction. Employment and income growth for homeless persons went down 17%, which is not a good direction. Reduction in first-time homelessness went down 10%. That's a good direction. Obtain and or maintain housing, if you exclude the bad data, we showed an increase of 9%. What would be key takeaways for this? First of all, I'll remind you, system performance measures provide a bird's-eye view of how well HMIS participating providers impact homelessness as a system. So this shows you the numbers that we're submitting to HUD, and it also gives you a window into what is going on with our data at this time. Asheville Buncombe's report for the HUD fiscal year 22-23 showed some improvement in 3 out of 6 HUD metrics. But as we've already stated, there are opportunities to improve our data quality, coordinate services, and access to targeted resources for chronically homeless. These updated measures will be available on the city's website, and the full data set and submission for our 2022 system performance measures is available in your board meeting packet.
And I do want to say again, I think it's important in looking at these numbers is to, number one, understand that on the HMIS side that we are looking at some skewed data because of data integrity issues. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the impact of COVID on these numbers as well.
I definitely attempted to try to see if there was a change. Why did the change occur? what agency saw a huge drop or what agency saw a huge increase in these metrics. And unfortunately, I don't have the ability to get to that data with
Right.
the software we have.
Right.
So that's why this data warehouse that we're bringing online this year will make a big difference in being able to mine the data so we understand more what we're looking at.
Yeah, well, I think that's extremely important, and we're moving in the right direction and looking at the right things on that, because the data that we're capturing is the data that we're using to make very important decisions in our community. And if we don't have appropriate data, it's really difficult. We end up making decisions anecdotally versus on sound data. So definitely think we're moving in the right direction.
One caveat, I will say I am very impressed with the agencies, how hard they work, and they are trying very hard to meet these guidelines, the data entry guidelines. So this is not to make any disparaging implications about the commitment that staff have at agencies, but it's very challenging. And does create some challenges to get this data into the system and get it in a way that HUD is asking for it.
Thank you, Charles. Really helpful, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us. Appreciate it. So we're going to move on to work group progress updates. We're a little behind schedule, so I'm going to ask.
Add something really quickly?
Sure.
I'm sorry, let me figure out where I am. For the pig count and sheltered and unsheltered, just in defining, I think piggybacking on what Jamie was saying about I don't know, I guess this is, I'm just trying to figure out, I guess this is a bit more, it can wait.
Okay.
Definitely, if anybody has questions later after the meeting, I can certainly talk.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to ask the work group chairs to keep their updates to just a couple minutes so that we can end on time today. So we'll start out for a coordinated entry. Marcus Laws isn't here, but Debbie Alford will be sharing an update.
Hey all, Debbie Alford, Homeless Strategy Division staff. Marcus has been chairing this work group. He's out of town this week, but I've been assisting with that work group as well. And so we met 3 times in March, and we've really spent those meetings really diving deep into the 4 elements of coordinated entry, what assessment, access, prioritization, and referral look like, what those kind of standards are across other communities, what we're doing here, and then maybe where we're going to go from there. And so since then, Marcus has worked on an action plan that our next step is to present that action plan to the work group in our meeting next week and kind of finalize what the lay of the land is for the next quarter. So that's kind of where we are.
Great. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
All right, governance work group, Jen Teague.
The governance committee has met, I think, twice since we last met as HIAC. This last time, we actually started putting words on a paper, so that's very exciting. So we have a draft charter started. It's going to be a long process because we're just now starting with membership, but we are very excited to see some progress there. We have another meeting scheduled for Wednesday, April 19th at 8:30 a.m., and that's an in-person meeting for 2 hours. And we're going to try to start meeting for at least an hour and a half to 2 hours, either weekly or every other week, to try to start getting some more of this information answered. We've continued to look at the charters of other communities, recognizing and knowing that, as Emily has told us, there's over like 400, I think, different charters out in the country. And so these are just 3, but to Elvia's point, really figuring out what we need here in Asheville, what this is going to look like. So excited about where we are with that, and I'm really proud of the members that are continuing to show up and do that research and come in with good answers and good suggestions.
Great. Thank you, Jen. All right, outreach and encampment response. David Bartholomew.
Yeah, we've been meeting Mondays at 4. We did not meet, the full group did not meet the week of spring break, but we had a smaller group to make a work plan, draft a work plan, and this week it was approved. We are not going to make any kind of recommendations on a policy in May. There's just too many discussions and too many things that we need to consider. So the new hope is that in this work plan that was approved on Monday is to present something to HIAC in July. as far as an encampment response policy. The work plan breaks it up into 4 sort of sections, and it could change some more. There could be some more delays, but we're hopeful to have something for the continuum of care in July.
Great, thank you, David. And David Nash is not here to give an update on shelter, so Jamie Benshoff is going to give the update.
Hi. All right, the shelter group has been touring shelters. We started with Transformation Village. We've gone to Salvation Army. We've checked in with the respite. We have seen the rescue mission. And at the risk of being bold, I want to say I'm really sensitive to the wait lists at Transformation Village and Salvation Army. These are people waiting to get in, and also the uncertainty that when the winter shelters closed, everybody who was housed there, sheltered there, faced. So anyway, that was very personal for me. And then what we are looking at for next steps is expanding Code Purple and notice the value of micro shelters in our community. And then Salvation Army is currently underutilized, and how can we invest in that?
Great, thank you for the update, Jamie. Is there any public comment?
Thank you. I'll try to be brief, as I know that you're already running behind. My name is Mary Singer, and I'm a person with too much lived experience, and I'm on the encampment and outreach work group, and I've prepared a few statements since we're all kind of here together today for each work group and for us all to collaborate with. It is essentially the job of a governance to create a container of safe space. I don't know how.
I think you might just need to turn your own volume up.
It is essentially the job of a governance to create a container of safe space, to set the tone and establish the rhythm in which the dance of community may occur. A container whose expanse is limited by the vision of creators who can only hold the mass of their own existence, who only recognize the sound of their own voice, and whose rhythm is at the mercy of their own lone sporadic drumbeat, is a container made for restriction and not expansion, for imprisonment and not for freedom, and may hardly be felt as a safe space to those whose vision stretches beyond the horizon of what the container creators can yet see. Your vision must encompass the yet unseen and what is beyond your current level of experience, if it is to include the masses we do already cohabit and thereby co-create with. I ask that in your creative endeavors, you build this ballroom container of governance you intentionally seek to include by way of deeply understanding and perpetually communicating with the masses your precious container will hold and nurture in its dance. I ask that your tone be pure in its intentions and your rhythm be steady and strong. It is by these measures and means we will know it is safe to dance. For the governance work group especially, we set out to improve our community. When we set out to improve our community, it is imperative that we realize our people can only be as great as our governance. To do this, I implore you to examine your own inner workings on both the individual level and the interrelational efforts of your departments and teams. I ask that you be a role model to the community you serve by demonstrating the type of community member you wish to see and experience when you look out of these hall windows. You might not ever do that, but may I invite you to explore the following. For each work group, I've provided 3 suggestions. I have many more, but I'll keep them minimal at each of these meetings. I suggest a trust-building training and exercise for all of the members of the work group, as well as the departments that they work with. I suggest you survey and address with careful concern each staff member's rating of their job satisfaction and effectiveness. And I suggest you an open invitation for community member assessments of governmental effectiveness and satisfaction. For the shelter work group, the effort to shelter should first and foremost be an effort to secure and protect the health and safety needs of each sheltered individual. I, along with too many others, have lived through multiple unsafe, unhealthy, and even life-threatening shelter experiences. For this reason, may I suggest the following. Please address incidents and risks of sexual harm and violation and/or personal injury within the shelter systems. I suggest both anonymous and non-anonymous internal and external reporting resources be made available to shelter inhabitants. I suggest operational procedure improvements, starting with revision and improvement of the orientation process for each new shelter entry client, including trauma-informed approaches and a variety of formats and resources for visual and auditory aid and future reference materials via video and brochures and handouts. For the coordinated entry system workgroup, navigating any system of care is a daunting task, especially for the individual experiencing life unsheltered. Making the entry system as painless and effective as possible, even enjoyable, is a paramount to providing safety and longevity within the system of care. May I suggest the following? Address the missing items and categories on the assessment forms, including cultural needs, age and ability accommodations, religious requirements, and natural supports. And may I also suggest a template that I was not able to print out this morning. It is for a intentional matching assessment form that I've created for a shelter plan that I've been writing for several years now. The intentional matching assessment system ideology is that you view the client as an individual and you provide all of the aforementioned needs plus more. There's a few more updates that I didn't get to include when I revised this one for the shelter entry work group, but I hope that I can provide that form to you when I can access a working printer. They're about 3 pages long, and they include questions that are more appropriate than the questions that I've seen on the coordinated entry worksheet that I've seen so far. Thank you for hearing me this morning. Thank you for taking the time to be here and do this very difficult work. I appreciate all of you and your dedicated efforts.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you for sharing your lived experience and your expertise on the work group as well. Any other public comment? All right. Our next meeting is May 11th, right here at 9 a.m. And
I did have one more other thing, just real quick.
Okay.
I think it's great. I want to hop back up on the agenda to the Housing First virtual meeting that we're going to have, information session. I think that's fantastic, but I also want to, bring up that Housing First is just one component of the process and what's available in the community. So I think it would be great if we had information sessions on a couple different things: emergency shelter, high access shelter, transitional housing, respite care, coordinated assessment, what that means. Because I think the more educated that we are and the public is about what's available in the community, the better off that we're going to be. So if we could possibly facilitate something like that going forward, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, if I can
Sure.
speak to that. Debbie, as you know, is on our staff team here and is responsible for training and is working on a training calendar. And my hope is that we continue to, as I said earlier, I think about this training, that we can really build a library, that we can really build a bank of resources, that our staff team can support that. Debbie's work will include doing some of those trainings herself, putting together the content and delivering some of that herself, but also bringing in trainers from other areas or folks with particular expertise. So our hope is to put together a training calendar and share that out with you all at an upcoming meeting. But yes, thank you for bringing that up.
That's fantastic.
I think we want to you know, knowledge is power, and we want our community to be empowered with the complex world of responding to homelessness so that we can really do this very well together.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things available, a lot of terminology out there, and again, it's important that everybody understands, you know, all of that. So, thank you.
Very good, thank you. Thank you all for being here. We're officially adjourned.